listened to the show long enough, they've now decided they know enough to manage it on their own, they can contact me, or they can skip by me, which is maybe suboptimal, but they have that ability, and they can go straight to TD Ameritrade and say, I don't want Phil to be my advisor, and they fill out a form. If you are working with Edward Jones or somebody like that, not that this is inherently bad, but it makes it more difficult for you if you want to change the account. If you have a problem with your advisor and you go to Edward Jones, the first thing they're probably going to do is tell the advisor. And they're going to call you and go, what do you mean you have a problem? And maybe you just didn't want to have that conversation. Anyway, I get on a little bit. So the wrap fee covers a lot of that, and that's a industry broker-dealer thing. He says theirs is 1%. Fantastic. I have seen wrap fees up to 3%, as I mentioned earlier before. He also gave me a specific fund that apparently they use to help clients, and it's called American Balance Fund C-Shares, BALCX is the symbol. So if you wanted to play along and look it up at morningstar.com yourself. One of the things he said that I was uncomfortable with, and he admitted it as soon as I questioned him on it, he says it has no upfront sales charge or commission. And when I pulled it up, it has a 1% load. Well, it's a delayed load, a contingent deferred sales charge is what the industry calls it. So you could tell the client that there is no upfront sales charge, which is true. It's not upfront. It happens later. Or it may only happen if you pull the money out, or it may decrease over time. That's often with B shares, which he says they don't hardly use and the industry is phasing out. But to say it has no upfront sales charge would imply to a lot of potential investors there is no sales charge. So I found that a little bit disingenuous, and it may have just been the language that he's taught, or he just typed it and I read it wrong. But he then came back and acknowledged that, yeah, it does have that 1%, but that's not there if you stay. It also has the advantage of, the expense ratio is 1.39, which, as the listeners know, you can get index funds for 0.2% or 0.1% or even below if you don't need an advisor. If you want an advisor, if this company is going to charge you 1%, maybe that's okay. And where I first initially read this, I thought they were putting people in 1.39% expense ratio funds on top of the wrap fee of 1%. So you as the client would be paying 2.4% in total instead of the 1.1 or 1.2 that you might with a registered investment advisor. He came back and said, no, that's not the case for them. Again, kudos for his company, but that's something that you as the listener can look out for. If you are paying a wrap fee or if you are paying a broker-dealer a percentage, what are they putting your money into? You need to look at that. You need to understand that. The reports that they send you, and you should get one at least every calendar quarter. That's the requirement by law. Hopefully, it lists the symbol. And when by symbol, usually for a mutual fund, it's a 5-digit code. For an ETF, sometimes it's a 3 or 4 or 5-digit code. If you don't have that, you might be able to sign online and get it. And you can go on the Google and independently research the things that you own and see what they are. And in a week or two, I'm going to take a very specific portfolio that someone sent me recently, and I'm going to, of course, change their name and everything, but I'm going to go through it and explain what they own and what it is and what is good and bad about it. So things to look out for. Well, that basically wraps up my desire or the information in this email from Bob, and I want to thank Bob for taking the time to not only send me the kind email, but to very politely respond to my possibly over-the-top snarky response. So, Bob, if you're listening, and of course his name's not Bob, thank you very much for the email. I greatly appreciate it and wish you the best in your endeavors. And hopefully at some point you can become your own advisor and not work for the man kind of thing and do your thing. So we're going to wrap this section up and go into our interview.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the center.
Nailed by David Fitzgerald is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
Only on Secular Media Network.
This is Phil Ferguson with Polaris Financial Planning, the home of science-based investing. I see people owning really bad investments all of the time. Many advisors are paid a commission by a big company to sell you something you may not need. It's kind of like church. They create fear, then they tell you what you want to hear, and then they take your money. What you want is an advisor that is paid only by you. That is a fee-only fiduciary advisor. Remember, people work for who they are paid by. You can contact me, Phil, at polarisfinancialplanning.com, or listen to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Each show, we have an interesting investing skeptically topic and an interview with someone fighting to end religion. Polaris also gives 10% of gross revenue to support the growing secular movement. You're not just getting better investments, you're helping to change the world. All right, everybody, welcome back. Of course, this is Phil Ferguson, and this is the Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have Dan Arel, who is an author and a blogger and an occasional guest on the Phil Ferguson Show. Dan, how the hell are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
And remind the listeners, what is the blog?
It's called Danthropology. It's on the Pathos Network, and you can find it just by going to danthropology.net.
Well, that sounds pretty easy, right?
Keep it simple.
and I know one of the things I do want to talk about, last time you were on, we talked about your first book, Parenting Without God. And, of course, if you have kids or thinking about kids or know someone that has kids, it's a great book for now and the upcoming Christmas season. It's not too early to think about that.
No, I'm pretty sure Walmart and Target already have Christmas stuff out, so now it's time to get your shopping done.
I thought for a second you were going to say that they already have your book out, but I would find that hard to believe. I walk through stores like that sometimes, and I always look for atheistic-y type of books, and I keep thinking if I find one, I'm going to buy it. Even if I already own a copy, just to say that, yes, this is something that can sell in your stores, but they're never there. The only thing really, really big bookstores will have them, of course. The other place I've found a few sometimes is in airports.
Yeah, funny thing is Walmart online actually carries a few atheist books.
No way.
Yep, I've never seen them in the stores, but Amanda Knief, I'm going to say her last name wrong.
That's correct, Knief, yes.
I got it, nice. Her book is on Amazon, or on Walmart.com.
Wow.
And Matthew O'Neill, who wrote What the Bible Doesn't Tell You About Sex.
Right.
His is online as well, and he actually thinks it's because they think it's a Christian book.
It's funny because if and when I ever get around to hiring a ghostwriter for my next book, my first book, the working title in my head anyway is An Atheist Raising Christian Kids. And I figured that would appeal to the Christian bookstores, and they'll sell it like crazy.
There you go. So you really get yourself in there.
Yeah, well, it's accurate. I was doing that until I came around to my senses, but that's another long story for the listeners. So you've got this new book, of course, talking about just in time for Christmas. When is that coming out? September, October?
October 1st.
October 1st. The Secular Activist. What the hell is that all about?
So It is about secular activism. Go figure.
How ironic.
And it really right. And it so it's told to the story of my fight with Ark Encounter and Ken Ham, but instead of it being just about me and that, it is really about the movement in general and secular activists from all over dealing with secular invocations and Ten Commandment battles. And really, to me, I wrote it as to what inspired me to kind of get started. And it's a call to action for all the people that sit on their computers and, they see something go wrong and they see religious persecution in some way against secularism. And then, they might share it, or they might think, I hope Americans United does something about this. But that's what happened with me and Ken Ham. I happened to just be like, you know what? I'm not standing for this tax break. I'm going to try to do something. And I got involved. And this it happens all over. You hear, someone goes to a city council meeting and hears a prayer and says, why are we praying? All right, fine. I want to do one. And they put their name on the list and they're told no because they're not Christian. And so they take action. And so the book really is sort of like a handbook for getting involved and getting active, and sort of how I did it and lessons I learned and what others did and how it worked for them or didn't work for them. And kind of closes off with a call to action to, step up and answer the call when necessary. And
it looks like you have a foreword by David Silverman.
I do. Well, President of American Atheists.
Yeah, that's kind of handy.
Yeah, that was that's a nervous thing to do, because you have to give somebody your book for the first time.
Yeah.
And then, they're going to have to either say like, you know what, this doesn't work for me. It doesn't align with my thinking. So when he agreed and wrote the foreword, it was great. It was a great boost in confidence. And I'll tell you, the foreword itself is really, really good. If you've ever read any of Dave's work, his writing's always really good. But, yeah, it was. I'm forever grateful for him to adding his name to that and giving his thoughts on activism.
So, listeners, it is called The Secular Activist. I'm looking at it on Amazon.com right now, and I can pre-order it right now.
You sure can. And Kindle and audiobook will be available as well. They just haven't been added to Amazon yet. But David Smalley read the audiobook, so you don't have to listen to me for 3.5 hours. You can listen to David's wonderful voice.
Well, we might talk about David a little bit later in that topic you and I discussed pre-show.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Since you mentioned Ken Ham, let's go back to that guy. Of course, you and I ran into each other again at the ARK protest. Why don't you give us your take on that event and what you think it went, how it went?
So I went with pretty low expectations. They had talked about, we're going to have a big turnout. And a lot of times those things kind of fall flat. They just don't happen. I've been to lots of protests and gatherings that just never really build. Or the people that show up in small numbers and they're kind of downtrodden. And so I agreed to go out and, got out there, but I had set myself up to be prepared for it not to be what I wanted. And it ended up being more than I could have dreamed of. There was something over 100 people there. The mood was wonderful. And the media turned out, in which what I really took from it, and it was even the message of the night, really was that we changed that story that day.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Where, the headlines weren't ARK Encounter opens. It was ARK Encounter opens under protest, or protesters show up for ARK Encounter opening. Like, we stole every headline from that. When I got back to my hotel after the protest, the first thing I did was flip on the local news, and I was flipping between 3 stations, and within 5 minutes I flipped and I saw my face on TV. And they were giving us and other activists full time to explain why we were there and to make it, not seem like this anti-Christian protest. We were able and got real airtime to say that we were there to protest the religious discrimination and the employment discrimination and the amount of tax money being used to do so. And the media really gave us a fair shake, which I did not think a Northern Kentucky media was going to do.
Yeah, it was surprising. That's the thing that, for me, the big takeaway is it's always fun to protest. And I I don't know if I've ever told this on the show. I once was involved in picketing a